I'm happy to introduce you to Heather Buckingham. Heather has been working with adults and children with disabilities for 30 years. She is currently the social worker with the Multiple Sclerosis Clinic at Hamilton Health Sciences. Her work focuses on supporting individuals with and/or their family members cope with challenges of living with MS. Heather also teaches courses at Mohawk College for the Social Service Worker Program. Prior to this, Heather worked as a social worker with the Autism Spectrum Disorders Service, it's a mouthful, providing support to parents and siblings of children with autism. Please join me in welcoming Heather Buckingham to share with us today on parenting and the young caregiver. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. As Penny said, my focus is on parenting and in general the effects that MS has on children. Let's see if I get this right. So we will look at some of the research that's out there just to give us an idea of what they find the impact is. There are a lot of challenges with research, which I'll go through what that is and what makes it so difficult to conduct research in this type of an area. We'll also look at, even though the research is more limited, what that has told us up till now about the impact of MS on children. So, I'm just trying to think. I think a little bit of the research touched on chronic illness in general, but primarily the research that I'm going to be talking about was specific to MS. And then more importantly, we're going to look at, well, what does this mean for you and your family? And how can you best meet the needs of your children and the situation that you're in? We'll look at what you can do as parents, what your kids can do, and most importantly, about how you can talk to your children about MS. I know there's a lot of different opinions from different families about do we tell our children or not. And that's probably more often in cases where it's a fairly mild case of MS and it's not so obvious. And people are more resistant at that point to talk about the MS. But certainly as the disease progresses, it becomes more obvious and there are things that need to be talked about. So we'll talk about how you can do that. And then I'll just touch briefly on intervention if you do think it's needed for your children or your family as a whole. And then I also have a list of books, and the list is just for books, but we'll also talk about some websites that are really good resources for children. And in particular, what I like about them is it gives you a way to talk to your children, whether it's you sit and read the books with your children, or if you read them separately, and then you have a starting point in terms of conversations. You know, well, what did you think about when you read about the MS and how it affects, you know, dad's mobility, those sorts of things. It helps start those conversations, which is really important. I will have questions at the end, but feel free at any time to put your hand up and ask questions, or if you have any comments about anything, I'd be happy to take those as well. So we know parenting is hard. Taking out any sort of disability, it's hard for anybody. The challenge is, you know, sometimes I think if anybody knew how hard it was going to be, you wonder how many people would think, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. A number of you were in the talk earlier with Kathy Lee and all the strategies around having to take care of yourself. Well, when you have children in the home still, you not only have to take care of yourself, you also have to worry about your children and meeting your children's needs. And as Penny said, we used to work in the autism program. And so many times when I was in that program, it was primarily the parents that I worked with to support them. And so often what they would say is, oh, I just wish it wasn't my child that had an illness. I wish it was me. It's so hard for them, and that was always the biggest concern. I have to say, when I came to MS, I thought, oh wow, that problem's going to be completely gone. Everyone's going to be happy that they have MS and not their kids. And that was a huge eye-opener for me. But then, when I stopped to think about it, I think, well, of course, as parents, we always worry about our children. And, yes, I'm sure you're happy that your children don't have a disability, but we're still thinking about, well, how is this affecting my kids? So what we want to look at is, how is MS having an impact on children? And more importantly, what can we do about it? So I'll talk a bit about the research first, because we like to do everything evidence-based. Some of the challenges of the research that's already been done is that there isn't a lot of it. And part of the reason there's not a lot of it is that it's really hard to research a particular dynamic within a family, because there are so many different things that impact family functioning, that impact child development. It could be financial, personality, your extended family. There's so many variables. It's hard to say, let's eliminate everything, and so that we can say it's the impact of MS that's causing this behavior in the child. Well, it's impossible to eliminate all of those other things. So research becomes very challenging. And I think, personally, I think that's why that you can't find a lot of it right now. I think when I looked back, I think I was able to find 14 studies in the last 15 to 20 years. And there was a bit more, like maybe 6 of those in the last 5 years. So I think they are trying to do more, which is a good thing, and hopefully they will figure out ways to be able to isolate some of those other challenges that they deal with. The research that is out there currently, most often the subjects, the families that are in, the MS in the family is a fairly mild case. And I would imagine that those are the families that have the easiest time getting out and traveling to wherever the research facility is, going through the process. Research, I don't know if any of you have ever partaken in research projects, but they take a lot of time typically. And you have to have your kids who are agreeing to participate. So it becomes quite a lot of work. And so I have a feeling that's why there's only been people with mild MS so far. But that skews the results. So really, the results that we know about are really more particular to people who have mild MS versus anyone across the spectrum. There is a bit of information for people that have more moderate to severe, but not a lot. And hopefully that's something that they can change as well in the future. They've had small sample sizes. I don't know how familiar you are with research, but when you're doing research, you want to have a fairly large sample, because you want to be able to see that the effect that you're seeing happens in most of the people. So if you have only 6 people, like let's say you were doing a study and you wanted to find out what's the most common symptom in people who have MS. If you have 6 people that you decide to look at and they all have seizures, you think, oh wow, seizures must be the most prevalent symptom that people with MS have. Seizures are actually the least likely of the symptoms for someone with MS to have. Only 2% of people with MS have seizures. But if your group is so small, you're never going to know that. So that's why they try to have studies with lots and lots of people so that they get a good picture of what's going on. But up till now, they've only been able to have fairly small sample sizes. The other issue with the studies have been the range and age of children. So of the studies that I looked at, they ranged from 4 years of age to 18 years of age. Well, again, if you have a small sample size and you have, even if you have 30 to 60 kids, but they range in age from 4 to 18, that's a huge range of age. So really, how many 4-year-olds were there? How many 10-year-olds were there? How many 15-year-olds? It becomes much smaller and smaller. So you don't get good results with that. All research likes to have control groups. So they can say, well, let's look at families that have MS, and then let's look at families that don't have MS, and see how those children compare. Well, again, there are so many factors that impact families that it's hard to compare. Is it MS or is it not MS? Actually, my point, got off topic there. My point with that was it's hard to find comparable groups. So you have this family that has MS, but maybe there's also another disorder in the family. Maybe there's a child with a disorder in the family. So then your groups are no longer comparable. And if they're not comparable, then you can't say, oh yes, kids that are raised in a family where a parent has MS, this is what the impact is. And then most of the research so far has only focused on one small aspect. So it could be, there's a study talking about just revealing a diagnosis to children. Another one was about coping with a parent that has MS, but they're focusing on one small thing. So even though there's 15 different studies, pretty much all 15 were about something different. So again, you don't have this robust information about what the actual impact is. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different issues that make research really challenging. It can be the severity of the illness, the individual child. All children have different personalities, they have different coping styles, different ages, different genders. Parents are different, single parent, two-parent families, blended families. Are there extended families involved in the support of the children? And then also social networks. So there's a lot of different things that impact families and therefore the children, which makes it really difficult. And then the last thing about the research that I'm going to talk about is, as I already mentioned, there was a wide variety of topics, a wide variety of different tests. So some are child reports, some are parent reports, some are actual tests that they ran, cognitive tests, emotional tests, behavioral tests, coping tests. But again, there weren't any two studies that looked at the same tests. Wide variety of ages I mentioned, and then there were also a wide variety of results. And again, I think that's probably because each of the groups were so different. Different studies had different results. So one study would say, oh yeah, MS has a huge impact on children being able to cope, and then the next one says, oh no, it doesn't have any impact at all. So you sort of look at it and think, well, what does that say for us? So what I've tried to do is I've gone through, and we'll pull out the information that's there, because even though that some of the research was conflicting, like the example I just gave you, it still provides really good information. So for example, the research of the kids that did not cope well, we can pull out, well, what were the factors that they found that didn't allow those children to cope well? And they're actually the same factors that allowed the other children to cope really well. So even though it sounds like the results are really negative, we can really learn a lot from that. But I'll get into that in a minute. But the one thing that the research, when we look at the research, is there's really only one thing that we can't change, and that's having MS is an added stress on children, and that can't change. But there are so many things that you can do that can really help children be happy and well-adjusted despite having an illness in the family. So this is just a quick little summary of the research that's here. As I said, there's lots of different things because of the wide scope of all the research. But one of the most important things that I found was in terms of this is high life satisfaction of children, is knowledge of MS was key. And the one study that showed a lot of negative impact was a study where the children were not informed of MS. about the MS, and they were looking at, actually they looked at kids that were told everything about MS, kids that were given partial information, and then kids given no information. And what they found was the kids that were given the most information, but that at an age-appropriate level, did the best. And the reason for that is kids know if something's going on in the family. Even if you have MS and nobody could really tell. You think, oh, kids can't tell, let's keep them happy and thinking everything's okay. Kids are really, really good at reading their parents. They know something's wrong. And typically what kids do is they blame themselves. You hear it all the time in divorces, child abuse cases, domestic violence. Kids will always think it was my fault. If I did something better, the family would be good. So even though they may not know physically, be able to tell that you have MS, they can pick up on the tension in you, in the relationship, and that has a big impact. And actually the group that was told that just given partial information, they actually did very poorly as well because they weren't given enough information, and so it just left them scared and stressed and anxious and depressed. So, and we'll talk a bit more about the types of information to give kids at different times. Parental acceptance of MS is another one that's huge. If you can't accept your own MS or your spouse's MS, it's really hard for you to convey to your children that everything's going to be okay. Yes, we have MS in our family, and yes, it's going to impact us, but we're going to be okay. And if you're not okay with that yourself, you really can't pass that information on. You could say it, but again, they can read us so well that they're not going to believe you if you don't believe it. And it's not to say that you have to immediately say, oh, I completely accept my MS. It doesn't work that way, right? It's a process, and it takes time, and your acceptance of MS is going to go up and down throughout your life. But if you're, as long as you're not in denial about it, not if you're just avoiding talking about it, you're accepting it as much as you can at the time, then that's going to be the best benefit. Kids whose parents didn't accept it did really well, had high levels of anxiety and depression. The other thing that had very positive results for children was their parent actively dealing with their MS. So that means, your children know you're going to your doctor's appointments, you're getting exercise that you can, you're not just spending day after day on the sofa because life is over and everything's awful. You're doing everything you can, even if that means you can only get up and do lunch. If that's your limit for the day, as long as they see that you're still actively trying to do things, that had a huge positive impact on children. And again, I think because it shows children that you think everything's going to be okay. You're going to keep doing, you're going to keep fighting, and that gives them that hope that this is going to be all right. Another important thing is having another adult that they can talk to. This can be their parent that does not have MS, or somebody outside the family. And really, my personal opinion would be to have both that they could talk to. And the reason for that is kids need to be able to say whatever bad feelings they have about MS, and that they hate the disease, they hate what it's doing to their parents, and they feel that if they say that to their parent that has MS, they're hurting their parent, and they're not going to say it. So if you have somebody else that your child can turn to be able to talk about those really negative feelings, again, it lets them get that out. I mean, for yourself, I'm sure you find that as well. If you have somebody that you can talk to about how awful things are, Kathy Lee was talking about that earlier as well in terms of caregiving. You need that person that you can go out and say, he's driving me crazy, I can't do it anymore. I mean, as parents without any issue, you feel that about your kids, right? I can't stand it, I don't want to see their faces. You know, you need to have somebody that you can make those comments to, and kids won't do it to their parents. Even the parent that doesn't have MS, they still might feel like they're betraying their parents if they say that. So having that other person in their life that they can talk to, if it's a teacher, a coach, an aunt or an uncle, a neighbor, a good friend, whatever that is. And it doesn't have to be a big burden on that person, because sometimes all you just need to do is say that one line, and then you feel okay. But having that ability to say it, and sometimes they don't even need to say it, it's the fact that they know they could. And that makes a huge difference for kids. And also their peer network is really important. And this can get really difficult for kids because it's hard for them to explain. It's hard for us to explain what MS is and what it looks like and what it means. It's so much harder for kids who, they already don't really have their own mind around what that means. So, you know, reaching out, if they have a good friend, you know, helping them talk to their friend. Maybe it's like one of these books that I mentioned earlier, you know, maybe they can check out a book together, check out a website. You know, if you can give information to their friend's parent to help them understand what it is that's going on, then they have someone when they're out, if they're out and they're just like, oh, it's, my mom's having a really bad day today with her MS. Their friends get it a little. They're not going to get it completely, but at least they feel like they can say it to their friend and their friend doesn't think they're just totally nuts. And they have. And the kids that did really well are also kids that kept social connections going with their friends. I'll talk about that a bit more when we're on the other side. And then reliance on positive coping strategies is really important. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. So in terms of kids that had really low life satisfaction, and by that I mean, you know, had a lot of anxiety and depression, a lot of behavior problems, emotional problems. These are some of the common themes that came up for those kids. And all of the things I'm going to touch on are, you need to think about them long term. Because in a short term, like, yeah, they may have days where there's too many responsibilities, and hey, that's life. That's not going to cause a problem. It's when they have weeks and weeks and weeks of too much responsibility. So that's sort of the framework of this entire side. So the kids in general feel that they need to help out around the house. I know it seems like everyone's thinking, no, they don't. But even if they don't do it, they feel they should be doing it. And I don't know if I'm sure people have noticed, if you've been sick, you know, have a really bad cold or the flu, your kids are a little more helpful because they see that you're not quite yourself. So it's a bit different when there's a chronic illness because you're not yourself for a lot of the time, right? So they're not jumping up to help you all the time because it kind of becomes the norm, but they're feeling like they should. And that kind of weighs on them. So the kids that did better in this, or in general, were kids that had very clear outlines about what was expected of them, because then that alleviates their guilt. You know, if you say, you know what, you're only 7 years old, there's lots of things you don't need to do around this house that, you know, I'll do or someone else will come in and do, you know, but this is what you need to do. You know, you need to clean up your room, you need to put your dishes in the dishwasher, whatever they are. And it's very clear, and then they know what they need to do, and that relieves some of that guilt that they need to be doing more because their parent isn't well. The kids that had too much responsibility really did very poorly in terms of they had a lot more depression and anxiety. They had a lot more social isolation, and we talked a few minutes ago about how important that is. But they didn't have time to hang out with their friends because there was so much work for them to do at home. or time to participate in sports or extracurriculars at school, even doing homework sometimes. It just was too much work for them to do. And those are the kids that really struggled. Feeling unappreciated, I don't think that really needs much explanation. We all know how that feels, to be doing just even day-to-day chores around the house that you're doing just to maintain the household. And yeah, it's really nice when somebody acknowledges what you're doing. It's that much more important for children to hear that. Individual and family isolation. So there's kind of two frames. The individual isolation, as I mentioned, if kids have too much responsibility, they tend to withdraw from their friends because they don't have time. Sometimes they withdraw from their friends because they feel their friends just don't understand. So again, when we go back to the other side, you can help their friends understand a bit what it's like, so that it's not such a big deal for them if they can't go out. Is she okay? If they can't go out because there's something going on in their home because of their parents' MS, their friend's not going to freak out about it and make them feel really guilty about it. Because kids do. They feel guilty about everything. Family isolation will often happen when the parent with MS typically starts withdrawing from family activities. And sometimes that's because the activities don't suit what their needs are at the time. And again, Kathy Lee was talking about that earlier. If you had regular family hikes and that person can't hike anymore, families were still going for their hike and that person was staying home, and it just causes a big rift in the family. And so it's really important, as she said, to find things that replace that. And if that person can't walk anymore, if it's not as simple as, well, we'll get a wheelchair, so that on those days we can still go for our hike, assuming the hike is somewhere that a wheelchair can go. But you need to find ways to still do everything as a family. Doesn't mean if there's not a favorite activity that you still have that maybe you do without the family member with MS, but it's really important to make sure you adapt or modify whatever it is that you're doing as a family to keep the family whole. And that also goes for things that you used to do outside the family, whether it's going to sporting events or concerts or dance recitals. I know a lot of those things can become a lot more challenging if you've got mobility issues, and it's about problem solving and figure out how can we do it at least some of the time so that the child doesn't feel like, well, this is my thing. I go to dance, but nobody comes with me, or my parent that has MS just doesn't come with me because they can't. So it's making that effort to be able to still do some of those things, at least some of the time. And a really big one in terms of a negative impact was when children had to support their parents emotionally. So if parents were really struggling with maybe new symptoms or deterioration, couldn't accept their MS, and they were just basically a mess emotionally, kids are going to jump in and they're going to say, "It's okay, Mom," and they're going to try to cheer you up and do different things, and that's putting a lot of pressure on them because they can't do it. So that one is, I think, had one of the highest sort of correlations with stress and anxiety in kids. And I think, just as we talked before about having someone that your children can talk to, that speaks to the parent having somebody that they can talk to as well, so that when they talk to their children, it's regular parent-child stuff. It's not that burden of supporting them emotionally. And it may mean getting some sort of counseling if it's to that degree, but sometimes just having someone else to talk to is enough. And then again, we'll touch on the negative coping strategies in a minute. Is there any questions so far? I know it's a lot of information about a lot of different research. Yes? She's just saying that most of what I'm talking about seems to be about two-parent families and wondering about research for single parent families. They didn't talk about that impact. They would just say so many were single parent families, so many were two-parent families. But they didn't really talk about the impact on the kids if there was also a divorce or separation in there as well, which is unfortunate because you do see that a lot, and that's obviously an added stress on children as well. And I mean, from the families I know, so this isn't research, this is just from my clinical work. Again, the families that I see where the kids are doing the best are the families that the parents are able to work together really well despite whatever issues got in the way when they were married. They're still able to talk. The parent that does not have MS is still able to be there for the children in a way that they are if the family were still together. But unfortunately, yeah, they haven't done that, which surprised me. I thought that would be something that they would have looked at as one of the first things, because it's also an easier thing to measure. But it doesn't. Any other questions? Okay, that's most of the research stuff out of the way. More interesting. So just to finish up on the positive and negative coping strategies. Coping strategies are probably the biggest thing, whether it's for children or people with MS or other family members. It's how you're able to cope with the challenges that the disease places on you personally or the family that makes the difference in terms of how your overall life satisfaction is going to be. So positive coping strategies would be problem solving. Oh, did you have a question? Oh, sorry. As I was saying, if there's an activity, Kathy Lee gave a good example of that as well with her, the woman she talked about who couldn't downhill ski anymore, so they figured out what it was that she liked. She liked being in the outdoors. She liked having the fresh air on her face and the sunshine. So they problem solved and came up with a different outdoor activity they could still do as a couple. And then when she got, when her MS progressed and she couldn't do that anymore, they found another one that she could still get those things that she enjoyed from being outside in the winter. And that's problem solving and saying, okay, here's the reality of MS. We cannot do this anymore. So what can we do? What was important about that event was that you were, most of it is in terms of children, is just you're spending time together. You're doing things. They don't care if you can't run up and down the street anymore. They're happy to do something else. For most kids, it's that one-on-one attention that they get from you, that interaction. So what else can we do that we still get those fun times together? Seeking support. We've talked a lot about that, whether it's, now despite everything I said about having somebody else to talk to, it's still important to talk with the parent that has MS as well for children, obviously. So, going to either parent, going to other extended family members or friends, having somebody that anyone can go to for support. Acceptance. Acceptance is huge. And again, as I said, it's going to waver over time, but the more you can accept your limitations at the time and the impact on your family at the time and not wallow in what can't be anymore, you're going to have better coping skills. And benefit finding. So looking at, well, what's the good side of having MS? Of course, nobody wants to have MS, but what good has come out of it? And for someone who, let's say it's a family where the dad was off working so much he was barely ever home, and now he can't work anymore because of his MS, well, a benefit would be he has more time to spend with his kids. If he's home during the day, he can maybe go to school activities that he could never do before. Be there after school when they get home from school and spend that time with them. So it's about looking for those things, no matter how hard they are to find, but finding them and saying, well, what good can we take from this? Because if we focus on what's bad all the time, it's going to be awful, and we're going to be miserable all the time. So typical negative coping strategies are avoidance, just don't want to talk about it. Don't mention MS, don't want to talk about it, pretend I can walk, pretend I don't stumble. Well, that's sort of denial, denial and avoidance. Or wishful thinking, going around pretending that, or hoping, oh, I hope tomorrow everything's going to be back to normal. It's not going to be. So when we get stuck in that wishful thinking, we don't move forward. And that's what we want to do both for ourselves and for our children. And in the research, it was a very distinct difference between kids that had positive coping strategies and kids that had negative. The positive ones were doing very well. And the ones that had the negative strategies had a lot of the mental health issues, the depression, the anxiety, a lot of behavioral issues at home and at school. So what we really want to do as parents is really focus on, first of all, ourselves using more positive coping strategies to model them for our kids, but then also helping our kids. Because it's not easy for kids to problem solve or to find benefit in something. So it's really good to sit with them and work through those processes, because it's going to come up over and over in their life. And it's a skill that is important for anything in life, to have those coping strategies. So the bigger question is, what does this mean for you and your children? So despite there not being a whole lot of research, we can still look at what we do have and see what that means for us. So this was a quote from one of the research studies. It said, if the expected responsibilities for parents are fair and appropriate, then this process can serve as a positive and constructive contribution to the child's development and sense of responsibility. That reminds me of the thought I just lost. So one thing that the research did find was that the kids that had more responsibilities than, say, their peers did, but those responsibilities were age appropriate and they weren't overwhelming, those kids actually really excelled later in life, because they learned a lot of skills. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I find my kids and their friends, they don't have the kinds of chores that we did when we were younger, the kinds of responsibilities around the house. And I think of when I was young compared to, say, my parents were young, we seem to be having less and less responsibilities around the home. And, you know, the number of my kids' friends that couldn't even figure out how to make a sandwich or make a box of Kraft dinner, because nobody ever thinks to teach us. So we're sort of in an age of, I'll do it for you. Don't worry, yeah, I'll get your food. You know, we have this need to do everything for our kids. The downside is they're not learning to do anything. And I was talking to another woman whose son's just gone off to university, and she was amazed by his roommates that didn't know how to do very basic things. Doing laundry, had never been taught, and then off he goes to university and doesn't know how to wash his clothes. And these are all things that, responsibilities we would have had as kids, at least at some point, doing our own laundry. So I think that's reflective in this research, that these kids that are having to do more responsibilities that aren't overwhelming are getting a lot of really good life skills out of it, and that's benefiting them down the road. So conversely, when children assume the role of parenting their own parents and forfeit their own personal needs for affection and attention, it can lead to the child being physically and psychologically deprived of parental attention, guidance, and secure parent-child attachments. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So this is just a little diagram to look at sort of what we've talked about in general with the research. So the child's context, I'll use my little laser. Oh, I can't really see it. The child's context box is, this is what the reality of the family is. So there's MS in the family, could be the mother, could be the father. There could be an additional parental disability. There could be a child with a disability. And then whatever family responsibilities they have. That's sort of the context they live in. Adjustment on the far side is how healthy they are, both physically and mentally, and how happy they are with their life. I'm not supposed to walk over there. The part in the middle, the mediational process, that's what makes the difference between that being a good life satisfaction, good health, good mental health, or poor life satisfaction, mental health issues, maybe even some physical health issues. So when children are able to identify stressful situations, and again, this is going to depend on their developmental stage that they're at, and they may need your help in terms of you saying, you know, you look really upset. What's bothering you? It's really helpful if we can name it. Saying you look stressed, because they may feel something and they don't know what it is. And when you say that, it gives them some language to understand what's going on. Helping them develop coping strategies, and also having resources, whether it's books, other people to talk to, websites to look for information on. Those are the things that make the difference in terms of how well they're going to adjust. Any questions about that? So, some things we want to remember is everybody has different coping styles. And as a parent, you need to really become an observer of your children. And not your children, if you have more than one, as a sum, but each individually. Because your children could each have very different coping styles. And their coping styles could be different from yours. So if you assume theirs is the same, as yours, you're not going to meet their needs. So you want to really pay attention to how do they cope with things. Do they cope better by, going out and running around and burning off some steam because that's how stress builds up inside them and they need to burn it off? Do they like to play music? Do they like to draw pictures? Do they like to read? Like, what is it that seems to let them decompress? And again, they're not necessarily going to be able to tell you this. You may have to get that from watching them. And even making suggestions. Like, if you think, well, maybe running around will help, go send them to run around. If they're still wound up, make another guess at what they might like, and then make sure you remember that for the next time. And be aware of what their needs are in that way. And really try not to impose your own coping style onto them. And coping styles shape communication. And what this means is, so if you have a child who, the easy ones are the ones that like to talk. Their way of coping is, I want to sit down and I want to talk about it. Because then you know exactly what's going on. They're telling you. But if they are one that needs to draw or write or paint, that's going to shape what you do. And you want to talk to them. So, tell me about what you're drawing. What's your picture about? What are you thinking? And it's hard without a picture, but if they're drawing a picture of the family, and it's your family, say, well, tell me about what's Dad doing in this picture? What are you doing in this picture? And use it as a way to help them talk about what's going on. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it every single time, but it's almost like a missed opportunity to be able to engage them in how they're feeling at the time. Because they won't remember. Kids, you get that, I don't know. What's going on? How are you feeling? I don't know. And they don't. It's not as annoying as it is, and you just want to say, just tell me. They really don't know. Perception of responsibility determines the impact of responsibility. So if your kids think they have way too many responsibilities, it's going to impact how they feel about how positive their life is. what their life satisfaction is. And if you're seeing that, you may think, oh, well, this is nothing. They have so few, oh, when I was a kid, I had so much. They don't have hardly anything that they need to do. But you're getting that from them. You need to have that conversation to see what is it that they're perceiving. And sometimes it's too much. If you have a child with a learning disability, let's say, a full day at school is exhausting for a child with a learning disability. If they have to, do your homework right away, and then you have to do this before you go off and have fun playing soccer, that may be too much for them to do because of how much just paying attention in school takes out of them. So you want to find out not just your judgment of how much responsibilities they have around the house, but what their perception of that is. And then play with it. And then I've said this a couple times, children they're not able to express themselves the same way that adults do. They most commonly express through behavior. So if your kid is throwing a temper tantrum over something and it's some trivial little thing, they're probably trying to tell you something that's going on. And it's not the time you're going to get anything out of them, obviously, because they're too distraught. But behavior is the biggest way that children speak to us. And I think sometimes, a lot of times, we need to change how we approach what that behavior is. It's funny, Kathy Lee was talking about how her husband was an accountant and she's a social worker and how different that is. My husband's a mechanical engineer and very different. And it really comes out in parenting, not everyday parenting, but parenting around bigger issues. So, he has more of the suck it up attitude. What's your problem? But also this, you did something wrong, there's a consequence. And you do the consequence. Whereas I am, it's like, well, what was going on in that? Not that there's not to be a consequence, but to me, whatever you were doing, it's trying to tell us something. And we need to look at what that something is. And then, maybe there's still, if they broke a rule, there's still a consequence. But to me, you look at it differently and try to see, well, what can I learn from that? Doesn't go so well with engineers. Yep. Someone else knows that, eh? So, what can you do? So, we've already talked about this a few times. Accept your diagnosis as best you can at the time. Again, that's something that's going to change over time. And particularly if you get a new relapse or you're progressing more, there's going to be a new level of acceptance each time something like that happens. Talk about your MS, and not just about what MS is and what, I don't walk as well maybe because of my MS, but talk about how it's frustrating for you, because that validates for your children what they're feeling and what they won't say. And, maybe they will talk about it and say to you, I really hate that we can't go to the playground anymore. And then you know something that you didn't know before. And that's when you can do your problem solving and figure out, well, how can we maybe still do something similar to that? Encourage your kids to ask questions. And again, this is where the books can be really helpful, because it's hard to encourage questions that you don't know what the questions are. And I don't know how many of you have tried to ask your kids, well, do you have any questions? No. It's always no, right? Because they can't think of it. But if you use some of the books for them to go through and read, maybe they won't come up with a specific question, but if there's something in the story that's similar to what's going on in your family, you can ask them, well, what do you think about that? Ben was having a really hard time because his mom couldn't do this with him. What do you think? And try to engage those conversations so they can ask more questions. Expand their knowledge kind of goes hand in hand. And that's going to change over time. The older they get, they're going to want more information. The more the information sinks in, So when you first talk about MS, they may not want to hear a lot. That may be enough, hearing that their parent's not well. But then once they sort of get over that piece of it, they're going to want more information. So always have information available for them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Take care of yourself. So important. I'm sure you've all found that when you take care of yourself, when you're more active, when you get better sleep, when you eat better, you feel better. Yes, your MS is still there, but you can do more things. Emotionally, you feel better, and when you feel better emotionally, you can connect better with your children. We already talked about having someone outside your family to talk to, and sharing some of your feelings. It's okay to say, you know what, I hate that I have MS. You know, don't go overboard. Just, you know, little comments like that open the door for your kids and say, yeah, okay, that's hard for them too. It's not just me that's mad at MS. Mom and dad are mad at MS too. Oh, it's not moving. Oh, there we go. Let's get one. Kids, things that you can say to your kids, that it's okay for them to be upset that mom or dad is sick. It's okay to ask lots of questions. Kids often worry about that. That it's important to accept that their parent has MS. It's just one of those things, and it's just part of your family. We talked about being specific about how they can help out around the house. But it's also important to tell them it's okay to go out and hang out with your friends. Lots of times they'll think, well, I need to stay here. Like, what if mom needs me to go get something for her? You know, what if dad needs me to go get mom because something's happened? They need that permission to just go out and have fun, and that's the best thing for you is if they go and do those things. Encouraging them to talk. Checking out books and websites. Our kids are growing up in a very different world than us. They don't use books a lot. They would rather go on websites, and I do have some of those listed in a minute. But make sure they have those avenues readily accessible, that they know where to find the books about MS if they have any questions. And encourage them that if they need to talk, they may not know the word counseling, but just say, you know, if you think you need to talk to someone about MS and how it's affecting our family, just tell me, and we can arrange that. And then also the kids' help phone is a good resource too, even if you just have the number stuck on the fridge or something, so that if it's something where they're feeling really bad and they don't feel that they can turn to you or whoever else is in their life, they at least know somewhere else to go. I think most schools really push the kids' help phone, so they probably already know about it. Okay. So talking about to your kids about us. As I said earlier, it's important to let them know because they know something's going on. So it's better that they have a word that they can call it. It gives them things they can ask questions about. It gives them something that they can tell their friends if they're trying to explain something, you know, why they can't do something. And it's really important to talk about what you understand about what might happen in terms of, and I don't mean down the road, like one day I could be, no, you don't need to focus on that because it's a complete unknown. But talk about, you know, what it's going to mean for your day-to-day. You know, what you can't do, but also tell them, you know what, I still can go to all your soccer games. I'm still going to be there after school. I'm still going to go to your dance recital. Because these are all the things that they're going to be worried about. Knowing that they can't catch it, knowing that it's not their fault, knowing that you don't die from it. These are all important things, and what it means for them. And, you know, you can say, if it's a time where if your MS has impacted you where maybe they do need to do a few more things around the house, then that's a good time to talk about it as well. If it's early on, it may not, but it's also maybe a good time to start doing things a bit differently and And, if they can, make their bed every day, if that's not something they were doing before, just as a start to get more independent themselves. So if you have preschoolers at home, I'm sure you found this with anything you try to talk about, it can't be very long, whatever you say. They will only take in, a minute or two's worth of information, and then they're gone. Even if they're physically still there, they're probably twirling, bouncing a ball, doing something different. So you want very small information, simple language that's easy for them to understand. So you're not going to get into a lot of specifics about what MS is. Simple enough to just say, sometimes it's hard for me to walk, or sometimes it's hard for me to walk for a long time. Just as simple as that. You can use pictures if it's something you can draw a picture of. You can use activities. Sometimes doing things that make, if you do have mobility issues, putting weights or something heavy on their legs so they can feel how hard it is to walk when you've got something heavy on your legs. And you can say, that's sort of what it feels like for me when I walk, just to give them that bit of ability to understand. But there's really not a whole lot of information that you can give to preschoolers. 6 to 12-year-olds, you need simple information, but they tend to want a lot more. They have a lot more questions in general about everything. So they're going to have a lot more questions about MS. And again, having the resources available is really helpful. The one thing that I personally always found hard with my kids when they would ask questions is translating those questions the answers in my brain to their level of thinking. Because I think of it the way I would think. And kids asking about sex is a perfect example. A 6-year-old saying, well, what's sex, Mommy? And you're thinking, oh my God, and you're thinking of all the technical, do I say all that? No, that's not what they want to know. They want something very specific. It's when mums and dads love each other. Oh, okay, and off they go. If that's not what they want, they'll come back and ask you more. So it's that changing how you're thinking about the answer. So if they're saying, well, is Dad going to be in a wheelchair next year? Well, first of all, you don't know that answer, but you don't want to get into all the technicalities of, well, if he has lesions and it's on his spine, then probably he won't be able to walk so well. Like it's way over their head. They want a yes or no, or an I don't know. Even saying, well, sometimes, not very often, but sometimes, yes, people are in a wheelchair after that much time, but most of them, no, are not. Simple answers like that.
My boys are in a stage
Okay.
12 and 9, and I'm the only parent in the house, and I'm teaching them to do more in the house.
Oh, great.
They rightfully wonder, why do they have to learn how? Their
Mhm.
parents don't have to learn how.
Yeah.
I'm fully capable now. So how do I not tell them about one day I might not be able to,
Mm-hmm.
while explaining why they're
Right.
taught these additional responsibilities?
In that case, I would treat it as something completely unrelated to MS. That what you're doing is good parenting. And as a good parent, I'm going to give you independence and life skills that you're going to need. Obviously, you don't say it in that way. But look at it as having nothing to do with your MS. That you are a parent with children that need to learn how to do certain things around the house. Because one day, you're going to be living by yourself, and who's going to do that for you? You need to know. And you think, oh, that's really sad that your friends' parents aren't teaching them that. What if they're hungry and they don't know how to make a box of Kraft dinner, right? I guess they're going to be hungry. So I think sometimes a challenge, actually a lot of the times with the people I work with, is everything gets looked at through the lens of MS. And I'm doing this because of MS. MS is only one part, right? Most of this, actually I'd say almost everything in this presentation is really just about good parenting skills, right? And what you want your kids to learn. And yes, in the back of your mind, you may be thinking, because, well, maybe in 2 years it's going to be really hard for me to do that. But that doesn't take away from the fact that these are things they need to learn and that they should be learning. Again, you're not going to have a 6-year-old making dinner for everybody. That's too far, right? But when my kids were in middle school, they each had a night where they had to make dinner. I was perfectly capable of making them dinner, but I thought, no, you know what? You need to have this skill. They were very simple, a soup with 5 different ingredients. It wasn't anything huge, but it's an important skill, and it's a contribution that they make to the family. And I think if you frame it right, they take pride in that, and we're really excited about making dinner. Like, oh, cool. I don't care. So, yes? Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. This is our house. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. That's right, yeah. Right. This is just the way it is, yeah. And that's a great point. Kids are really accepting. And I don't know if you've ever noticed when they go to your parents' house or another family member's house, rules are completely different. And I used to tell my mom, I don't care. Feed them junk food, let them stay up late. I don't care. They can do that at your house. And I think it's great. They're not doing it at my house, which is why I think it's good they can do it at your house. And there was never any, it wasn't confusing for them. Well, why do I get to do it here? No, this is the rules here. This is the rules when we're here. And, maybe something that would help is when your kids' friends come over, is have some of those things that, well, in our house, this is what we do. Before you leave, all the toys get picked up or the video stuff gets put away, whatever it is they're doing. So it helps with your kids say, okay, yeah, these are rules in my house. No matter who's here, it's not that my friends don't ever have to do that. Yeah, if they're in my house, they have to do that too. If you're having a sleepover, plan it so that they're making pizzas together, so that all of their friends are cooking dinner. So then to them, it just seems like something that happens in our house, not something they have to do and nobody else has to do. And then maybe their friends will go back to their parents and say, hey, we got to cook dinner there. Can we do it here? And it helps solve a bit of your problem. But it is hard, and even as a parent without MS, it's really, really hard to parent when different things are going on in your friend's house. Well, why can they play Modern Warfare and I can't play Modern Warfare? Like, well, we don't play Modern Warfare in our house. That's the rule. But there are so many different things, and families have so many different rules for different reasons that it makes parenting just that much more challenging. But I think if you just put the MS part of it aside, and think of it as, these are good skills for my kids to learn. Any other questions? Another suggestion that one of the books I was looking at made was inviting them to a doctor's appointment and letting them see kind of the tests that you get run through. And like obviously MRIs and things, but when they test your reflexes and bend your knees and have your walking test, have them see those. Let them ask the doctor questions and see if that helps. Not every kid's going to want to go, but if they have that interest, encourage it and get them to ask questions, because they may ask the doctor questions you had no idea were even on their mind. But to them, they may have it in their mind. This is a question you ask doctors, so I wouldn't even think of asking my parents or anyone else. Did I miss an age? No. Adolescents. They obviously, anyone who has adolescents know, all they think of themselves as more adult than kid. So they want adult-like information. They're still young enough that they do need much simpler information. So keeping your whatever information you give at a level, and even within adolescence, you're going to have a huge range of ability to understand information. Encourage them to ask questions as always. They'll have a lot more ability to access different resources, so we'll probably come up with different questions that you have. I would just, with any age, but particularly adolescents, make sure they're aware of good websites and not so good websites. It's hard to know what the not so good website, but let them know what the good websites are, and that if they're gonna research MS, to go to the good websites, because there's a lot of nutty information out there, and that's the last thing that they need to be reading about. Help them find out answers that you don't know about, because they may not even have questions just about your MS, but just MS in general, and they may not be answers that you know because it hasn't been an issue for you. So you can help them find out more. Again, having another adult they can talk to, and be prepared for anything. I think that's just good advice for parenting adolescents in general. You never know what you're going to get. And I find, having adolescents, I find the most interesting thing is how old and young they are at the same time. It's not just that they're taller and I'm looking up to them, but they'll talk about things. It's like, oh, wow, conflict in Syria, yeah. And then they're off to they're wrestling on the floor. It's like, what happened, But it's such an unusual age for me, seeing that huge diversity in what they're like. But it's important to keep that in mind, that even though they may be doing high-level things at school and conflicts and talking about genocides and all sorts of things, their questions about MS may be much more basic and at a much more childlike level, because there's a lot more emotional investment in it. So, I think it's always, even with adolescents, it's always better to start out a bit more on the simple side and let them ask more questions. So, if you say, it's when I walk because of my MS, my foot drops a bit and sometimes I trip, and leave it at that. And then see, do they come back, well, but why does that happen? Then you can, give a little bit more detail of an answer and see if that's enough. And just let it go and let the questions build or stop, and that will sort of tell you what level they're at in terms of being able to hear the information. And sometimes it's not that they can't cognitively get it, they can't emotionally hear it. Like that's just too much for them to hear. So I think, as I said earlier, being really good observer of your children and paying close attention as objectively as you can, hard to do as a parent, but really to get a sense of where they're at in terms of coping and understanding. And keep talking. Keep talking about MS and how you feel using the books, but most importantly, don't focus on the MS. I mean, we're talking about MS today, and I'm talking about how important it is to talk about MS, but that's only one small part. And you want to be really careful that every time you open your mouth to talk to your kids, it's not about MS. And how are you feeling about my MS? And what is my MS bothering you? You have to have more, like maybe 10% talking about MS and 90% other things. How are your friends? What's going on at school? What you did? Oh, today I was speaking at a conference, and these are the people I met. And do make sure the bulk of what you're talking about is not MS, because that also puts in perspective for them that this is our life, this is our family, and MS is a part of it. Not MS is our life and our family, because that gets really overwhelming, and then it's not fun. They're not going to want to talk to you if all you ever talk about is MS. So don't even open your mouth. They'll be out the door before you can try to talk. So really have that balance of more everyday things that are not anything to do with MS, and a little bit about MS. And again, that's maybe for some kids it's better to have a time. Once a month we sit down and talk about MS. Some kids it's going to be just whenever something comes up on their mind, and they'll have a question about it, and then you'll talk about it. So some of the warning signs that maybe your child isn't coping well, and doesn't necessarily mean that they're not coping well because of your MS. It could just be something's going on in their life. Sleep disturbances, if they're having trouble falling asleep, if they're waking up at night, if they're sleepwalking, or maybe they're awake but just kind of roaming around the house at night because they can't sleep. That's usually a sign. Changes in their behavior, and that could be from bad behavior to good behavior. Sometimes kids are too good. Not that you can't enjoy them being good, but also have kind of in the back of your mind that it's not normal for kids to be really good. Changes in emotion. If they seem shut down emotionally, or if they're crying a lot or angry a lot, that can be a warning sign. If you're hearing from the school that there's problems at school, or if they become too quiet. Any of these signs, may mean you need to get them to see somebody. Going to your family doctor is usually the first place to go to get to any other sort of agency. But you want to find out what's going on. And again, don't automatically assume it's about MS. Like the doctor this morning was saying, maybe it's a bursitis in your shoulder. It has nothing to do with MS. Same with your kid, same with you. You may be emotional, may not have anything to do with MS. Unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is when you have something like MS in your life, or autism, or Down syndrome, or cancer, you assume everything is about that one thing. And it's not. There are so many other issues that could be creating those problems, so you want to have them explored. All the school systems have social workers within the boards as well that you could see if you can access. Different boards have different levels of support that they give, though. So if you do think intervention is needed, you can focus on both individual and family. If it's some of the warning signs we've talked about, probably you want to start with individual for your child to help him or her deal with emotions. But you may find that what you need to get into is a bit of family counseling to work on how you're talking about things. And again, it may not be the MS that's the issue that's communication is around. It could be communication around something else. But those are helpful. Usually an individual, it's a lot of cognitive behavior therapy where you work on changing your thoughts. If you're always thinking negatively, turning those around to have more positive thoughts, like the benefit finding we were talking about earlier. Or they could have help with problem solving is another one. But not all kids are going to need it. So here are 3 really good websites. The Canadian website is great for information, and nothing on there that would lead your kids astray. The Australian website is also very good, and the American, which is called the National MS Society. And these would be things, you could even have them bookmarked on your computer so that anytime they wanted to look up information, it would be easy for them to find, and they wouldn't have to remember what they need to type in. The National MS Society also has an app for their smart devices, iPods, iPhones, whatever, that it's not really kid information, but maybe for an adolescent who likes, their world is so different than ours, that might be a better resource for them. It's not as good as the website because you just can't get as much information on that, but that's just another source. So up at the front here, I've left a couple of lists, one list, it's a 2-page that you're welcome to take about different books for kids. There's these books that talk specifically about MS, and you find them on those websites that I've just listed, and it says that on the information sheet, which again is a great way to help conversations get going about MS. And then I've also included fiction that has characters whose parents have MS. And I think this is also really important because kids need to see themselves in other things. There's not any TV shows I know of where a parent has MS, so that's out. But these fictions, so they can read a story about somebody who's growing up and their parent has MS, and they think, oh, this is just like me. And that's an important connection for them. So that's also on that list. Any other questions? Yes?
What's the best way to tell your explain to your grandkids?
To your grandkids? I would say in the same way. You know, just say, are you grandma? Is that what they call you?
Yeah,
Grandma.
yeah.
You know, grandma has an illness. It's called MS, and this is what it means for me. You know, you can say MS is different for different people. Oh, the walking stick, yeah. And you can say, depending on their age, it can be very simple. You know, my walking stick helps me walk because it's a bit hard with my MS. And just...
My youngest one just walked out of the bus the first day and he threw his backpack on the ground and he says, Nana, pick it up. I said, I can't do it. You do it. You're closer to the ground than I am. Because I'm very, I tell like
Yeah.
And so he goes, but Grandma's older than you. She picks it up. Grandma's not here. You know?
But again, that can go back to our comment about it doesn't have to have anything to do with MS. Why should you, whether you have MS or not, pick his backpack up off the ground? He dropped it. He should pick it up.
He threw it down.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to, you know, your first reaction is always going to be, oh, it's because of my MS. Let it go and then think, okay, is it appropriate behavior to begin with? MS related.
Well, I called him a brat one day and he says, I'm not a brat. I'm having inappropriate behavior.
Oh.
I said, no, you're being a brat.
See, they're learning things like that at school. So you use that, say, well, it's inappropriate behavior for you to throw your backpack on the ground. Well, unfortunately, there's none of the books talk about grandparents, but that's all helpful.
Can you outline the easiest ways to get your kids into counseling or a family situation for everybody?
Well, most of the services that are free, I mean, if you're going to pay, you can just look somebody up and pay. But for any services that are funded, you have to go through your family doctor. And then depending on what agencies are in your area, they would make a referral. Like in Hamilton, there's the Children and Youth Mental Health, and they would make a referral there. Usually there's family service agencies in every city. Sometimes it's Catholic family services, but you don't have to be Catholic to use them. What's that? The schools, yes. It depends, I find, from board to board. The social workers do a lot of counseling type things with kids, and then other boards, the social workers do attendance issues and are focused on that. But it's a great place to start for sure. You can talk to your local MS society. They may have people or places that they recommend. What area do you live in?
No,
Just in general?
For the other people.
Yeah.
The only one that I also suggest to people is their EAPs.
Yes,
They
yeah.
actually cover children as well.
That's
and
right.
Most companies now have EAPs, and
Yeah.
EAP is an employment assistance
Yeah.
program, and they actually have it for kids as well.
That's a great suggestion too,
Especially
yeah.
in the bigger communities around here, they have EAPs
EAP.
for children. So it's good.
Mm-hmm. And most likely you're not going to find someone that knows a lot about MS and that can see your child, but they don't necessarily need to, right? They would be skilled enough to gather enough information, and then if they thought, oh yes, they need to know more about MS, they can pass them on to somebody who can do that part. They could still see them to help them process everything, but they could get that MS information for somewhere else, because you're not going to find a lot of people that have a lot of experience in MS. Yep.
You have the list of fiction books up.
Yes, they're just up here beside the projector. Gonna grab them.
You good?
You good?
Thank you, Heather.
Oh,
Parenting
startled
can
me
be.
with
Oh,
the mic.
sorry. Parenting is difficult at the best of
is, it
times.
is,
You add a hiccup and it can certainly become overwhelming. I'm pretty sure that everybody is leaving here with much more clarity today, and better yet, a lot of useful tools that I definitely know that I will use myself. So thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Put my thank you sign on.